So, a miracle in the Course is primarily defined as an expression of love that has a healing effect on another person, and
Mm,
that in turn heals you. And I love that it's relational. So, for example, if I offer you love and that heals something in you, that makes you feel better, that makes you feel brighter, that makes you feel like we feel when we're loved. It's just a warm feeling. That's a healing thing for you. And then you will have some gratitude for that. And then that gratitude comes back to me, and your love in return heals me. And so that's the primary definition of a miracle in the Course. It's an expression of love, it's behavioral.
Welcome to a Broaderlenspodcast.
The opinions expressed on Broaderlenspodcast are those of the guest speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views of the host or Broaderlenspodcast. Emily Perry, thank you for coming on Broaderlenspodcast. I look forward to hearing and learning from you. So thank you for coming
Ah,
on.
thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe you can introduce yourself since I tend to screw that up.
No worries. I'm Emily Perry. Some may know me as Emily Bennington. I just got married not too long ago to Robert Perry, founder of the Circle of Atonement. I'm the executive director of the Circle, and the Circle is a nonprofit spiritual teaching organization that has been sharing the path of A Course in Miracles for 30 years now, founded in 1993, and I'm responsible for all aspects of sharing the mission, and I'm also a teacher for the Circle as well.
Wow, thank you. Yeah, as I was sharing with you earlier, just before we started, I love learning from everybody from all walks of life, all different types of beliefs and religions and so on. So thank you for coming on. Yeah, I look forward to it.
Yeah, we were talking before you hit record. You've had quite an array of guests on the show.
Yeah, thank you. Fairly new, but yeah, I'm just trying to learn from everyone. So um, maybe you can walk us into your upbringing before you found A Course in Miracles.
So I'm from West Virginia originally, and I grew up Christian. And I grew up Presbyterian Christian, though, which, if you are not familiar with the denominations, Presbyterians are known as like, I don't want to offend anyone, but like the lazy Christians. Like you can come to church, you can not come to church. It's all okay. Jesus is love. God is love. I had the best possible upbringing in Christianity. I really considered my church to be my second home. The youth group leaders there were like my second moms. It was great. And then I went into a Baptist church that was very different. Not so much the church that I was involved in. That church was fine. But what I was seeing more broadly was more judgment, and I didn't agree with those the theology of the Baptist church. Especially as it pertained to women and homosexuals. So I left the church, but at the same time, I still retained a deep affection for Jesus and for spiritual truth and for community. And so I was longing for those things, and that set me on a spiritual quest. And at the end of that quest, I found A Course in Miracles, and that'll be my path for life.
That's awesome. Thank you. So, how did you exactly find A Course in Miracles?
It's probably cliche to say, but I think the Course found me. I
Mm,
was going through one of those proverbial dark nights of the soul. And this was January of 2011 when it really kind of hit ahead. And my kids were 6 and 5 at the time. And I just remember I was not being the person that I want to be in this world. And I said to them, I don't know what's wrong with me, but I'm going to figure it out. And I promise you, I'm going to get better. And that was, again, January of 2011, and I found A Course in Miracles in March of that year. So it was very quick after I hit the proverbial bathroom floor, and I found the course. And a few months later, I ordered it, and I'll never forget. It shows up in an Amazon box, and it was the course, and it was an intro booklet by Robert Perry.
Mm.
And so little did I know that the course would be my path. The guy who wrote that intro booklet would be my husband before too long.
That's awesome. Congratulations again.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I knew when the course arrived, I knew it was true. I didn't know what it said, but I knew it was true. Yeah.
mm. Yeah, it kind of, you just reminded me of that Rumi quote, the great Sufi Rumi. He says, "What you're seeking is seeking you." How you found the course.
Yeah, that's a good one.
um, I was just talking to a friend yesterday who's a Christian, but he's very open minded, right? And I was telling him about a Course in Miracles, and he never even heard of it. I just sent him, and he's going to purchase it. But maybe, if you don't mind, if you give us a little walkthrough, a brief walkthrough of the history and how it all came about.
Yeah. It's amazing that the course, so few people have heard of A Course in Miracles. That's really unfortunate, because I think it's here to share a message that could have a real healing effect on our world that desperately needs it. But the history of the course is that Helen Schuckman and her colleague Bill Thetford were psychologists in New York City in the 60s. And in June of 1965, Bill had had enough of their infighting in their department, in their psychology department where they worked together. Evidently, it was a super contentious place. And so Bill said to Helen, again in June of 65, there must be a better way. There must be a better way for people to get along and cooperate instead of compete. And Helen, by her own account, to her surprise, stood up and said, "I'm with you. I'll join with you in this, and I'll help you find it." And then from June to October of 1965, Helen started to have these inner experiences, these inner visions, these heightened spiritual experiences. And all of that culminated in October of that year, when she heard, "This is A Course in Miracles, please take notes." And so that was the beginning of the inner dictation of the course. And then from October of 1965 to 1972, she took down the text, the workbook for students, the manual for teachers, and then it was officially published in 76. And the course has wisdom in it like the world has never seen. At the heart of this path is that we find our way home to God through a radical egolessness and defenselessness. And the central teaching of A Course in Miracles is, of course, forgiveness.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it. Who is Jesus in the Course of Miracles, in A Course of Miracles, versus the Bible?
So, yeah, so in A Course in Miracles, Jesus is a son of God. That's different than how he shows up in the Bible, where he is the Son of God. In the Course, he is our equal. He is an elder brother. His job is to help us find our way home. So the only difference between us and Jesus is that he is able to help us get home. He completed his part perfectly when he was here, and thus he can show us the way. The manual for teachers says that Jesus is one who saw the face of Christ in all of his brothers and thus remembered God. So what Jesus was able to do is to make a decision to see the true equality and holiness in everyone. That's how he remembered God. And he did that beautifully and perfectly and can show us how to do that ourselves. So I guess that's the big difference between Jesus in the Course and Jesus in the Bible. In the Bible, he's the Son, whereas in the Course, he's a son. But at the same time, there's so much of Jesus in the Gospels, particularly. So I'm thinking of the Sermon on the Mount in particular, where in that beautiful teaching, I mean, I think the Sermon on the Mount is one of the greatest teachings to ever touch planet Earth, where you love your enemies and you offer them forgiveness. And so what the Course is an extension of Jesus's original wisdom teachings. I don't believe that Jesus came down to die for our sins. I think Jesus came to show us there was no sin. And that was the heart of his teachings in the Sermon on the Mount. So I think Jesus has always been teaching the same message. I don't think he showed up 2,000 years ago and then showed up in the 60s teaching a different message. I think he came down originally as a wisdom teacher who taught a message of we can be carefree and love one another as an unconditionally loving God loves us. And that was his original message. We got it all wrong. We got it all distorted. And I genuinely believe that the Course is his attempt to give it to us again.
Mm, thank you. It kind of seems like A Course in Miracles is like a modern version of the Gnostic Gospels in some kind of way. I don't know if you're familiar with the Gnostic Gospels, but in the Gospel of Thomas, it means twin, right? And Jesus says, if you drink from my mouth, you can become just like me. And he's like showing us a mirror reflection of who we really are, and I love that, the Christ in you.
Yeah, it is a beautiful idea, and the best, most radical Christian reformists have all had the same right idea, which is that you don't have to go through a church, through a priest, through anyone to find God. God is in all of us, and I love that message. In fact, what you've just said about the Gospel of Thomas reminds me of a quote in the Course from Jesus, where I think I've got it here. He says, "There's nothing about me that you cannot attain. I have nothing that does not come from God. The main difference between us as yet is that I have nothing else. This leaves me in a state of true holiness, which is only a potential in you." And I love that idea that there's no difference between us and Jesus. He doesn't have anything that we can't attain. The difference between us right now in time is that he has God and nothing else. And we just muddy it down. We've got God, but we've got our grievances and our hatred and our anxiety and our depression and this body and our illnesses. We have all these other things mixed in. He doesn't. And that's the difference between him and us.
Yeah, thank you.
And in fact, sorry, now that I'm just on a little
Go ahead.
roll, the fact that he had God and nothing else is what allowed him on the cross when he was ripped apart, murdered essentially, well, actually, but it enabled him to be on the cross with his body broken to say, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." I mean, that's radical egoless. That's what we're talking about here. To do that is obviously a state of spiritual mastery that we can attain, but it's a long road.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful teaching from that story of that happening to him and him showing love at the very most horrific time of his life. He shows compassion and forgiveness for others, for they know not what they do. And I think that's what draws a lot of. Talked to a lot of Buddhists, and that they love that part when it shows compassion, and that's like the purpose of Buddhism in many ways, and some aspects of what the Buddha taught. And I think if the Buddha was, in those days, he'd probably be crucified as well, because of they were radical. Jesus was radical. He went against the collective thinking, and he seen the collective ignorance, and he tried to bring people back
Mm-hmm.
and remember who
Yeah,
they
there's
really are.
many different tradition. Oh, I'm sorry. There was a lag. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I think that we had a
Oh no,
lag,
go ahead.
but go
No
ahead.
problem.
Um, you mentioned Buddhism, and yeah, I've met many Buddhists who recognize the wisdom of Jesus, and many Muslims who recognize the wisdom of Jesus, and it just goes on and on and on. We know there's something about him. And I know there are many people who have woken up in this world. There are many extraordinary teachers, and there are many paths, and they all get you home in the end. But there is something really unique about Jesus, and if you're a student of A Course in Miracles, he's your teacher.
Hmm. What are a few of your favorite verses in A Course in Miracles?
Um, I love the beginning of lesson 155 in the workbook, where it says, "There's a way of living in this world that is not here, although it seems to be." And I think about that a lot. How do you
Hmm.
live in this world but not be in this world? And I think the answer to that is you go through all the motions of what it is to be here, but you carry a perspective that what you see with your physical eyes, what you touch with your hands and hear with your ears is not all that's going on here. And in fact, it's not the truth of what's going on here. There's something deeper and richer within all of us, and that is what is real and what is true. So I love that there's a way of living in this world that seems to be here, that is not here, although it seems to be. Um, and then just kind of sticking with the workbook still, I love lesson 109, I rest in God. I love that idea that no matter what's happening out there, because there's a lot happening out there, we have this quiet center within that we can return to, and the answers are always there, and the peace is always there. So those are some favorites of mine.
Well, I love that. I don't know if you heard of Thich Nhat Hanh. He wrote The Living Buddha, Living
Mhm.
Christ, and in back of me there's Jesus and Buddha were brothers, and but in one of his writings he breaks down resting in God, and you just brought that up, and I don't know, it's a beautiful universal truth that's in the course, and Thich Nhat Hanh was definitely a very highly awakened master as well. So
Don't you love it when there's
yeah,
overlap
yeah,
between the teachings? It's always nice to discover those.
yeah. I think it's beautiful, to be honest. Um,
Yeah, it is. It is.
and A Course in Miracles. How does it define miracle?
So, a miracle in the Course is primarily defined as an expression of love that has a healing effect on another person, and
Mm,
that in turn heals you. And I love that it's relational. So, for example, if I offer you love and that heals something in you, that makes you feel better, that makes you feel brighter, that makes you feel like we feel when we're loved. It's just a warm feeling. That's a healing thing for you. And then you will have some gratitude for that. And then that gratitude comes back to me, and your love in return heals me. And so that's the primary definition of a miracle in the Course. It's an expression of love, it's behavioral.
well, I love that because it has 50 principles of miracles, right, in the course.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, there's the Course lays out at the very beginning these 50 principles of miracles, and it's really setting down at that point the foundation of what we're going to learn in the text. And they're amazing principles, each and every one of them.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to ask you a few questions on some wording that's very famous in Christianity, like the word sin. How does the course define sin?
So I think sin, as defined in traditional religion, Orthodox religion, is that you've done something that has put a black mark on your soul.
Mm,
And it's going to be really hard for you to remove that stain. And in fact, it's so hard, Jesus had to come and do it for you. That is not the Course's teaching. The Course's teaching is that there is no such thing as sin. So in the Course, God doesn't need to forgive you because he never condemned you. And so the teaching in the Course is that your true identity was created by God and it's perfect. Otherwise, it couldn't be created by God. Because if God could create something that isn't perfect, he wouldn't be God. And because God created you perfect and because he's God, you can never do anything to destroy that perfection that he created you as. And that's a really important teaching in the Course, because if you could do something that could override his will, that you are perfect, then you would have a power greater than God, and you don't. So you're created perfect. There's nothing, like, in your true nature, there's nothing you can do to override that perfection that he put in you. Now, we make all kinds of mistakes. We are vicious to each other here. You mentioned before we hit record that you grew up in a gang. I'll bet you have seen some things. We are awful to each other here. And still, we can't override that perfection that we are in our true nature. And so the work of the spiritual journey is through the practice of love to reconnect people with who they truly are and walk each other home. So in
Thank you.
the Course uses the word sin, but doesn't actually believe in it.
Mm.
In fact, if we always recommend at the Circle that whenever you see the word sin in the Course, just put little quotation marks around it in your mind, because it uses the language of sin, but it doesn't believe in it. So that's, you put little scare quotes around it, because whenever the Course says sin, it's just trying to use a concept that we understand, but one that it's ultimately trying to dismantle.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. I think Eric Butterworth, the Unity minister, I think he was in the '60s. He called sin self-inflicted nonsense. Um,
Oh,
but uh,
yeah.
Ernest Holmes and Charles Fillmore would say there's no such thing as sin either, and they're in the New Thought movement. Unity and
Yeah.
religious science.
I think there's a real, I mean, there's a discussion to be had between the ways in which we really are vicious to each other on the behavioral level. I'm not trying to say that that isn't happening. And at the same time, I think if we can look past what people do on a behavioral level through the hurt and pain that they've experienced to their true nature, that's the basis on which we can get to true forgiveness. And so the way to get to forgiveness in the Course is to overlook the error that someone else made, no matter what it is. And
Mhm.
once you get to the other side of that and see them as who they really are, then the concept of sin doesn't make any sense.
Looking beyond the behavior and questioning how they
Mm-hmm.
develop those behaviors. For me,
Yeah.
I'll go ahead.
No,
For
please go
me,
ahead.
in Buddhism, they say understanding is love's other name. And when I practice understanding, and when I started to understand me and what created like suffering within myself, wrong perception, even behavior patterns and emotional reactions, when I started to understand that stuff in me, I could see it in other people. Oh, and then start questioning like what happened to them. What happened? Maybe they come from a lot of trauma and so on, and it affected their brain development, created behavior patterns and emotional reactions. And that does the Course talk about spiritual bypassing? No.
No, not
Mm,
so much. Spiritual bypassing is a modern term.
yeah, yeah.
We didn't hear about spiritual bypassing 20 years ago. This is a new thing. Um, and the idea behind spiritual bypassing is that you use spiritual tools, you misuse spiritual tools to avoid what's happening right in
Mm,
front of you. So one way to use the the course has been accused of spiritual bypassing, and here's one way that you could do it. So you could say, there's a line in the course that says, the past is over, it can touch me not. And you can use that language to stay in a situation that is unhealthy. And that would be an example of using the tools to bypass. I did a sermon about this, so I can unpack it for you if you'll give me like about a minute or so.
Sure.
And I suspect you asked that question because have you seen that sermon that on
Part of
spiritual
it.
bypassing in A Course in
Yeah.
Miracles? Okay, yeah. So there's two poles when it comes to how we tend to go through life in the spiritual space. There is true bypassing where you are in what is effectively denial and you're not looking at all. You're just using spiritual principles to cover up what's happening as a way of not seeing it. That is not what's being advocated in the Course. But then there's the whole other side of that where we call it never passing. So there's true bypassing where you're truly in denial. You are genuinely overlooking things that are happening. And then on the other side of that, there's never passing where what's happening and how angry you are about it are all that you can see. So rather than not looking, all you're doing in that anger is seeing what's happened. You're just something's been done to you, you've been hurt in some way, and all you do is ruminate on it and ruminate it and spin it and spin it and spin it. And we do this for years, decades. So those are the two opposite ends. You cannot look, or you can only see what's happened to you. And what the Course is offering is a better way. It's a middle way. And there's a beautiful quote in the workbook, I think, where it says, you pass by false witnesses on God's Son. So that idea of pass by, so you see what happened, you see the ways in which you've been hurt, but you don't cling to it. You pass by it because you're able to transcend, because you see the difference between what is real here in the world of form and what is ultimately real on the other side. And so I love that middle ground. So you're looking, you're not denying, but you're not holding on to your anger. You're looking through it to the truth. And that's how you get across the bridge.
I love that. Thank you.
And by the way, that's the only thing that's going to heal, truly heal. You know, the great spiritual activists of our times have been activists who worked towards and with love. So they weren't ignoring the injustices of the day. Take the civil rights movement. They weren't ignoring the injustices of the day, but they also weren't meeting violence with violence. They were demonstrating a better way. The nonviolent movement rooted in love.
Yeah, I love that. And Martin Luther King got a lot from Gandhi, and Gandhi got a
He
lot from
did.
Jesus, and also the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna. But they practiced that nonviolence. Are you familiar with ahimsa
Yes.
principle?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
That's pretty. It's a
Yeah.
beautiful, and it's love. It's really just having love and seeing the divine in all beings, like Jesus did. So
Yeah. I
perfect.
had a Himsa necklace that I wore for a long time. Yeah. Beautiful teaching.
Yeah, and Thich Nhat Hanh was actually good friends with Martin Luther King. And Martin Luther King, I talk a lot about Thich Nhat Hanh because he's one of my heroes, but he passed away a few years back. But yeah, he was really angry and upset when Martin Luther King died, and he talked a lot about that. He was even involved with the Buddhist monks during Vietnam. That one of them burned themselves alive. I don't know if you ever seen
Mm-hmm.
that video, and he explains
Oh,
it's
yeah.
very similar to what Jesus did to get the he sacrificed himself pretty much. That's how he broke it down to get the attention of people. So this guy sacrificed his life to get the attention for help to help other
Mm-hmm.
people.
If
Martin Luther King nominated Thich Nhat Hanh.
oh,
Uh,
okay.
they're really good friends, and I think they understood each other because because they lived in love,
Yeah.
understanding, and compassion. Yeah, some of the great
Yeah.
ones
You
did.
can speak completely different languages and understand the language of love.
Yeah, like the Christian mystic Miser Eckhart once says, the mystics will understand, theologians will argue at the
Ooh.
differences.
Yeah, that's a
And I
good
love
one.
that. Yeah, I love, because that's true. They understand. They're. It's kind of like what Jesus says: "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." See God in all things, because you're not controlled by these labels and belief systems and all that stuff that creates ego identity, and you can live in the heart and see God in all beings. And that's how I see it. That's through my awakening.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's it.
How
That's
does
what I was saying about Jesus. He saw the face of Christ in all his brothers and thus remembered God. What you just said about seeing God in all beings, same idea.
yeah, kind of like the Namaste saying
Hmm.
in India. Yeah, I love that. What is the course? How does it break down heaven and hell, which is another some famous wording in Christianity?
So, in the Course, heaven is the only true reality. In the Course, we're all in heaven right now, dreaming of these bodies.
Mm,
So, in the Course, God did not create this world. There's a great line that says, only madness would have created a world such as this. And if we look around, we can see how true that is. God created heaven. That's all that's real.
mm,
And there is no hell in the Course. The Course says hell is what you make of the present through your egoic thinking. And I think if we sit on that one for a while, we can see the truth in it as well, because we know what it's like to live in the hell of our own mind. And so when it comes to fire and brimstone and gnashing of teeth, and of course doesn't subscribe to any of that.
mm,
No, in the Course, God is like the definition of God is unconditional love stretched to infinity. And how could an unconditionally loving God send anyone to hell? It's impossible. It's an
mm.
unloving act to send someone to hell to burn for eternity, and a loving God would never do that. So, Course doesn't subscribe to any belief related to hell. Hell is what we do to ourselves.
Yeah, I love that because it never made sense to me when I was younger. Like, okay, you have a judging God, and but then it says in John, "He that dwelleth in love dwelleth in God, and God in him," and I think that's a beautiful saying. But then you have a judging God, which kind of creates confusion. And then in Corinthians, that beautiful saying on love, it says love keeps no record. So I'm like,
Hmm.
okay, kind of confused.
Well, yeah. I mean, and that's been the real misfortune of religion, really. I mean, well, Christianity specifically, where you have an unconditionally loving God who is mixed with a God of vengeance and wrath. And so as Christians, you have to look around and say, well, what do I believe? What do I believe? And I think it's done cellular tragic damage to the human psyche,
Mm,
because
right.
what it has done is we could have from the beginning, if we had just got Jesus's message of an unconditionally loving God, then we could have learned how to be unconditionally loving to each other. That's what
Mm,
he came to teach. But instead, we got this wrathful God. And so, what has that taught us? That's taught us a God that says, you step out of line and you will be punished, sanctions that same behavior in us. And so, what we have learned is that it's okay to say, you step out of line and therefore you get my anger and you get my wrath. Well, that behavior is okay. You know why? Because God does it.
mm.
We screwed it up. We screwed it up. If we would have got God right from the beginning, we would have an entirely different world today.
I love that. Thank you. Yeah, I always say, for me, God is not love. Love is God. Because in the Bible, you hear a jealous God, a loving God, a judging God, et cetera, et cetera. But when you just say love is God, all that other false qualities go away, and it's all love. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's God's best quality.
Yeah. Thank you. How about the crucifixion and resurrection? Does the course teach that? I'm sure it looks at it totally
Yeah.
different if it does.
Yeah. The course does teach the crucifixion and the resurrection, but it does put a completely different spin on it. So the original Christian spin is that humanity sinned, and instead of a great sacrifice needed to be made, and so Jesus was sacrificed by his loving father. Like, again, that doesn't make sense. Like, why would a loving father murder his son? But doesn't sound like loving behavior. But Jesus was crucified to atone for humanity's sins, but then he rose on the third day. And so we're grateful because he arose and because it demonstrated the power of him as God's son. That's a completely different message than what the Course is teaching. What the Course is teaching is that we are all attacked in a lot of ways in this world. And the message of Jesus's crucifixion, it was a teaching demonstration from him. And here, this is such a beautiful idea. He was teaching us that if he could demonstrate love in that moment, then we could demonstrate love in all of the little crucifixions of our everyday lives. So he was basically saying, with his own life, if I can teach only love even now, you can do it too in the smaller crucifixions that you face. Stunning. So the Course says the message of the crucifixion is teach only love, for that is what you are. And the message of the resurrection is nothing can destroy truth. And so the same things happened to, these are historical facts, we believe. A man named Jesus was crucified. A man named Jesus arose from the dead. The meaning that we place on that is everything. And so in historical Christianity, Jesus arose from the dead because it was this grand demonstration of the power of him as God's son. In the Course, the message of the resurrection is that nothing can destroy truth for everyone. And so what that means is that it's not that Jesus arose because he's so special. It means that we will all transcend death. And that was another teaching demonstration from him. So the message of the crucifixion is teach only love, for that is what you are. And the message of the resurrection is that nothing can destroy truth, not even death itself. Those are beautiful teachings. They're my favorites.
Yeah, I love
Thanks
that.
for asking
Thank you.
about them.
That was great. Thank you. What about the ego? How does the Course define the ego?
So the Course defines the ego as the mind's belief that it is separate from God and that we get our needs met through attack. So it's our own false belief that we are separate from God and from each other, and that we're going to make our way in this world by attacking other people. So in the Course, it's very different than some other paths. There are many traditions that say, yes, the ego exists, but we need to befriend it. We need to let it in, let it sit at the table, dance with it, hold your ego tight because it's the thing that keeps you safe in an unsafe world. In the Course, the ego is not the thing that keeps you safe in a dangerous world. in the Course, the ego is the very thing that makes the world dangerous. And so in the Course, you're never trying to dance with your ego. You are always trying to dissolve it.
I love that. Thank you. What else would I wanted to ask you? Because I wanted to soak in some of your knowledge about A Course in Miracles, and I really appreciate your insights. Trying to think. Second coming of Christ. That's what I was trying to get at. Does it talk about the second coming of Christ in A Course in Miracles?
Yeah, it does. There's these really cool little sections in the workbook we call them the what is sections, where it defines things that we're all really curious about. So, it's like, what is a miracle? What is the body? What is death? And one of them is, what is the second coming?
Mm.
And the Course defines, well, let me go back to the historical definition. The historical definition is that Jesus is going to come back and separate the sinners from the chosen ones, and the chosen ones go up to heaven, the sinners go out. The Course doesn't have anything to do with that. In the Course, the second coming is merely a return to sanity. I
Mm.
love that idea. The second coming is when we all just wake up and realize what's really going on here and see each other for the truth of who we really are. And so that section, what is the second coming, actually goes on to say, because the second coming is a return to sanity, we should hasten its coming by being active miracle workers, healers in the world. The section even says that he needs our eyes and our hands and our feet and our voice. And I love that idea because it's such a reframe. When we think about the second coming, where Jesus is going to come down and judge us, and we might go to heaven, we might go to hell, it's like this tragic thing, and we want to forget that the Bible ever said it, and put it off for eons, hopefully. But with the Course, if the second coming is a return to sanity, why wouldn't we want to hasten it? Why wouldn't we want to hasten the day when everyone wakes up? And so then we should be using our eyes and our voice and our hands to make that happen as soon as possible.
I love that. I never even heard that. That's awesome. Being returned to sanity. I come from the 12-step community, and step 2 is about being restored to sanity. And the word sanity comes from the Latin word sanus, which means healthy. And all this anger, this
Mm.
trauma, this wrong perceptions, this fear, resentment, all that good stuff. Not even good. I shouldn't use the word good, but all that stuff created an unhealthy way of being. And I started to live in conscious separation. And I love what, that in the Bible, it talks about I and my Father are one. Or Thich Nhat Hanh will say, enlightenment for the wave is a realization you are water, not the wave. And when I realize all the other waves are not separate from me, but they're all water, that
Mm-hmm.
changed everything for me. I could see the Christ in you, and you can see the Christ in me because we're all connected. And yeah, that's changed my life. Yeah, I love that. But that's being restored to sanity
Marianne
for me.
Williamson Totally. Marianne Williamson has a great teaching on this idea of us all being the wave. Maybe you've heard this in another form, but if we're individual drops, then why wouldn't we be afraid of all of the other individual drops that could overpower and harm us? But if we know that we're all the wave and we think about the power of the wave together, then we start to be like, all right, I'm part of something big, grand, and beautiful, versus I'm this separate, tiny little drop afraid of all the other drops that might hurt me. And so if I had one wish for humanity, it's that we could see how connected we all are and act as the wave versus the separate drops.
I love that. Yeah, and I learned that from Hinduism. The Hindus talk a lot about the ocean analogy of God and the waves, and if you look at when the wave hits the shore, it looks like it dies, but it doesn't. It goes back to the ocean of spirit. So I don't believe in death. I don't. How does the Course look at death? Do we die? Do we have one life? Does it talk about reincarnation? I don't know. Sorry if I'm jabbering.
Um, no. These are, look, you're speaking my language. I could do this all day. The Course does have a section in it that talks about reincarnation, but it acts like it's not part of its official teaching. And the Course acts like reincarnation is true, because in the notes, Helen's notes, he talks to her specifically about her past lives, like things that have happened to her in the past. But then he goes on to say something really cool. He says he will tell her more about her past when it's of no use to her ego and when it can be used to help someone else. Beautiful idea, because the Course acknowledges that, yeah, we've been here before. We're going to keep doing this until we learn the lessons that ultimately take us home. But what we want to do with reincarnation is be like, well, who were we? You know, was I someone famous? Was I someone great? Was I abused? And if it can work both ways, if the ego's in charge of who we were. If we are someone who was exalted, then our ego can use that to pump us up. I've met a million people who are like, I was there when Jesus walked the earth, you know, and they just want to use it as like, yeah, I was there. But then there's a flip side of that too, where, I mean, I had a past life reading where he was like, you were seditiously abused, like, and first of all, I don't know why he would tell me that, but second, if I clung to that, if I was someone who clung to that victim of abuse past life, which was evidently horrible, then I might use it to explain things in my life now. And that's also an ego use of past life. So I could say, oh, now I know why I'm so angry. And I was, in the past life, I was abused. So that explains why I'm so mad now. Okay, I get it. And then all that does is make my anger more tolerable to me. And so the ego can use the past life experience either way. And so the Course does acknowledge that we've had them, but it doesn't want us to put too much stock in it.
Yeah, thank you. One question I wanted to ask you is, because like I said, I came from the 12-step communities, and it seems like Dogma. I asked Lama Choga this the other day when we recorded in Buddhism. I asked him if Dogma could find its way through Buddhism. Does Dogma definitely found its way through the 12-step communities? Is Dogma, has it found its way in the Course movement?
No, not so much. No. In the Course, we're really just on a journey to undo what the ego has done to our mind and learn the lessons of love. And so we're not paying any kind of karmic debt or anything like that. We are just walking each other home.
Oh, I love that. Thank you. I'm going to ask you a little.
Actually, there's a oh,
Oh no,
well,
go
I'll just
ahead.
say real quickly, there is a teaching on karma in the Course, and I love this one too, because he says karma, the karmic history demands abandonment for abandonment, like an eye for an eye, right? That's what we think of. He's like, I came to bring mercy, not justice. Now, in the Course, justice is love. It's not that you aren't held accountable for things, but I love that idea that we can offer mercy instead of what we, instead of vengeance. Yeah.
I love that. Thank you. I'm going to ask you a tricky question. If you had one choice to live the rest of your life, one book that you can choose, what would it be and why?
The Course, there's no question. Yeah. I mean, first of all, look at it. It's 2,000 pages. So if I only had one book, I want the thick one. But it's also, this is just the greatest wisdom I've ever known.
That's awesome. Thank you. Do you have any last words for us? Anything you might want to touch on?
Well, yeah, I've been doing a lot of interviews and in our own community talking about the spiritual path, how spirituality in general has been pulled to a solo effort, meaning that we think that the work is internal just to our own mind, and that as long as we are right with God and are thinking the right thoughts, and sitting on our cushions, that is the work. And what I would love to share is that it's it's real spirituality when it's other oriented. And so we want to be on our cushions. We want to be right with God. We want to have the thinking that puts us in the right state of mind. We want right-minded thinking. All of those things are important. But what they're meant to do is to help us become people who can go out and heal. And so at the end of the day, what all of that is leading us to is an other oriented focus. And that's what Jesus demonstrated. That's what we're asked to do in the Course. That's why a Course in Miracles is a course in the expression of love. And so that's the last thing that I would share is just for your listeners. I know they're on a spiritual path, and spiritual path is about love, and love is behavioral towards other people.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think I'm going to end it with the Thich Nhat Hanh quote. Thich Nhat Hanh once said, Jesus said, love your enemies, bless them that curse you. When you look deeply into the anger, you will see that that person you call your enemy is also suffering. As soon as you see that, the capacity of accepting and having compassion for them is there. Jesus called this loving your enemy. When you are able to love your enemy, he or she is no longer your enemy. The idea of enemy vanishes, replaced with someone who is suffering, and compassion is there. So thank you for coming on. And
thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
This was beautiful. Thank you for the great work that you're doing. I've really enjoyed this conversation. It was so great to meet you. And I hope that you continue this always, because you're doing good work in the world. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And I will get your information. I'll upload your links, how to find you and stuff once we upload this video. So thank you.
Okay.
Have a good one.
Bye-bye. All right. You too. Bye.
Just know we out here. Know we out here working in a major way. Had to speak on it just to make a play. Any given subject, know we make a way. Time to level up on the day-to-day. Know we out here working for the greater good. Expand your mind, broaden your lens the way you should. From the stars to the galaxy, to speak on spirituality. Higher understanding for the neighborhood.